In 1963, Ford battled Chevy with an entire Galaxie, and it still wasn't enough. Hi there, Rick Jabril with another chapter in the automotive evolution. Here once again at the Martin Auto Museum in Phoenix, a great collection. More than 180 cars, and each one has a story, like this 1963 Galaxie 500 XL convertible. But before we talk about this specific car, make sure you like and subscribe. And in the comments below, let me know what I got right, what I got wrong. There's always something I get wrong in my research. And tell me your stories about the Ford Galaxie. Did your family have one? Did you grow up in a Ford family? Now, on one level, 1963 was an awesome year for Ford. They won 27 NASCAR races and the championship. But they didn't win the one thing they really wanted, the sales championship. The Galaxie was part of Ford's three-prong approach to divide and conquer. They had the Falcon, the Fairlane, and the Galaxie. But it still wasn't enough. So let's start this story with a little Galaxie history. The Galaxie name was first used by Ford back in 1958 with a concept car called La Galaxie. Don't those headlights look a lot like the taillights they were using in the late 50s? Anyway, the company apparently liked the name so much they brought it back in 1959 as part of the Galaxie series of Fairlanes. Think of it like Chevy's Impala, same car underneath with some more style up top, and it sold very well. When Ford redesigned its cars in 1960, the Galaxie name continued as the upper range for the full-sized Ford, competing in the large car segment up against vehicles like the Chevy Impala and the Plymouth Fury. The Galaxie went through another redesign in 1961, even sleeker than the previous year. The big news in '62 was that the Fairlane name moved to Ford's new intermediate-size platform. Galaxie was now the primary full-size car for the Blue Oval. But it is important to point out in 1963, the Galaxie wasn't alone. For 1 year only, Ford also made a car called the 300. Sitting on the full-size chassis. It was a stripped-down Galaxie that was perfect for fleet buyers or someone trying to save a buck. At the other end of the scale in 1963 was this Galaxie 500 XL convertible. It cost a full $600 more than the two-door 300, and that's before you got a big block under the hood. And nearly 30,000 people were willing to pay that extra price for Ford's top-of-the-line convertible. There were actually three Galaxie lines available in '63. You could get the base Galaxie, a little nicer than the 300, nothing fancy. You could then bump up to the Galaxie 500, once again just a little more upscale than that base Galaxie, or you could go all the way to the Galaxie 500 XL. So what did XL stand for? Well, Ford used both extra luxury and extra lively to describe their top trim, depending upon the ads they were pointing at. Ford also made a car called the Torque Performance. It had a vinyl roof that actually looked like a convertible top where the top was in place. Kind of odd in my book. Let's walk around and take a look at the styling of our 1963 Ford Galaxie 500 XL convertible. And there were quite a few changes between 1962 and 1963, but remember, that was the norm back then. A lot of changes just from one year to the next. Significantly, one of the things that happened was from 1962 to 1963, the emblem moved to the grille. The year before, it had been up above. They also added these Ford letterings, added this little raised lip down below. Headlights were now completely within the grille. The previous year, it had kind of blended onto the side. The side also had a pretty significantly different look in the sense that now it had two chrome strips, one that ran the entire length of the body and a second one down below. And significantly, this one also molded into the door handle right there. Going all the way to the back of the car, now you had these little hash marks, gills, whatever you wanted to call them. But in '62, you had simply one chrome line that ran along. Now you had two, and I like the way that they were able to incorporate this into the back, kind of a smooth styling. In the back, those classic Ford bullet tail lights. At first glance, when you look at the back of this car, it doesn't look significantly different from the 1962 model, but in reality it was. These taillights were moved up pretty significantly. The previous year, they actually cut down into the bumper itself. Now they were mounted much higher. Also, this section with these little elements inside looked different. The previous year, I think it had some horizontal strakes going across. Big Galaxie lettering going across there. As you can see, we have a resto mod here at the museum. It's got newer wheels, and we'll take you under the hood in just a little bit, show you that engine, which is a lot different. The Galaxie had a wheelbase of about 119 inches. It was 210 inches long, so it was definitely a full-size car. Remember, they had already come out now with the Fairlane, which was their mid-size car. That was about 115-inch wheelbase, but it was about 13 inches shorter overall. And then, of course, the other end of the spectrum, the smallest you could get, was the Falcon, 181 inches long, 109-inch wheelbase. Now think about that. That meant that the Falcon was nearly 20 inches shorter. Remember, it was divide and conquer. Can we get 3 different brands to equal what Chevy was doing? Because they didn't have their Chevelle out at this point. So unfortunately, it still wasn't enough to give Ford the leadership in terms of sales. This also has this Magic 406 badge right here, and we'll talk about that in just a moment when we go under the hood. By the way, here at the museum, we just happen to have a 1963 Chevrolet, so we can make a direct comparison. Now, this is the Bel Air, not the Impala, so not quite as fancy as the top of the line. But the significant thing I would always point out is look how they have creases, the very sharp lines in the styling. When you go over to the Ford, it's a much more rounded look. It's just a different concept of how they were going to do the styling. These big lines that kind of came down right here, the crease on the side. Ford was more into a rounded, smoother look. Whereas Chevrolet, they wanted the creases. They wanted sharp lines. Inside, the 1963 Ford Galaxie had kind of an evolutionary restyle for its dashboard. If you look at the 62, it's similar and yet different. This same bulge that goes up over the speedometer is there, although it seems a little bit taller in 1963. Same horizontal concept with the speedometer, but now it's flanked by temperature and gauge on one side and fuel on the other. It's kind of a sportier look that they were going after. It also has a different look underneath, where now instead of a body-colored stripe going all the way from one side to the other like they had in 62, now it has this bright work, this metal work that goes all the way across. And as you can see here, somebody in this car put in a little more modern, well, modern when I say cassette player, a little Sony cassette player right there. Also looks like we've got aftermarket air conditioning that's been installed by Allstate back then. If you got the convertible, you were also going to get, and you got the XL, you were also going to get these bucket seats. Bucket seats had first been offered in a Galaxie the year before, and you also got this center console as well. And in the back, while they weren't bucket seats per se, they said they had bucket styling, kind of that individual contour into the back. And it's really important to talk about the significance of the bucket seats in this car. And that's the fact that they were trying to really come up with a sportier concept of what people wanted in cars. People, they looked at those Thunderbirds. They didn't want to buy a Thunderbird, but they wanted some of that Thunderbird style inside. As I mentioned, they had first used the bucket seats in 1962. So putting them in 1963, it was appealing to a younger buyer, somebody who wanted a more upscale, racier kind of concept in their car. In a lot of ways, this interior is really very similar to what Chevrolet was offering in their cars in 1963. If you wanted, well, you want something a little more downscale, I guess, you could go with the Fairlane. And it was really aimed at a sportier market. In fact, if you look at the dashboard on the Fairlane, it's got these 3 big gauges right there. And because it was a lighter car with those big horsepower options, had more performance. If you wanted to step up, well, you didn't do it in a Ford. You did it with a Mercury. The Mercury Monterey, which was actually built on the same basic chassis as this Ford Galaxie. But again, this was a solid competitor for the Chevy Impala. In very many ways, very similar. It really just boiled down to, did you want a Ford or did you want a Chevy? Ford had an impressive lineup of engines for the Galaxie in 1963. At the base of the lineup was a 223 cubic inch mileage maker 6 engine with 138 horsepower. It was an overhead valve setup, and in fact, it had been used in Ford passenger cars since the early 1950s. At the beginning of 1963, the convertible came standard with a 260 cubic inch V8 that was making 164 horsepower. But that was replaced mid-year by a 289, the V8 engine that delivered 195 horsepower. But it was the FE series of V8 engines that really formed the core of the 1963 Galaxie's V8 performance options. Started with the 352 that made 220 horses. More performance buyers, though, were opting for the 390 that made 300 horsepower. And if you had connections, well, you might be able to take things up another notch to the 406 cubic inch FE V8. It was developed for racing, going head-to-head with the Chevy 409, and nearly 5,000 were sold to Galaxie buyers. Depending upon the carb setup, you either got 385 horsepower or 405 horses. And it would cost you, of course, between $430 and $488 extra. Mid-year, the 427 came online, and if you went for the maximum horsepower, it's 425, and about 5,000 of those were sold as well, costing between $461 and $570, depending upon the carb setup that you were going to get. Now, it's believed that our museum car was one of those real 406 models, but today, it's got a different engine, a 390, and a lot of custom touches, as you can see. So what happened to that original engine? I mean, it was a 406, it was valuable. Well, it was likely driven 1/4 mile too far because, very likely, that's the reason someone bought it. In 1963, Ford actually had 45 different models available, from the base Falcon all the way up to the midsize Fairlane, to the station wagons, and of course the top-of-the-line 500 XL and the convertible. The most expensive Ford available, though, wasn't the Galaxie. It was a Thunderbird. By the way, there were actually 48 models if you counted the 3 vans, and we won't even go into the trucks. But it still was not enough to knock Chevy out of the top sales position. Now, some say the Falcon and the Fairlane were simply cannibalizing, stealing from the Galaxie buyers. Others, though, they blame this car. Its big problem, they said, was the fact that it was too heavy. But if you had the right engine, say the 390 with 300 horsepower, or better yet, the 406 or even the 427, more than 400 horsepower, well, there was plenty of fun to be had, which is exactly why I believe XL stands for extra lively.